Hi friends, it's Robin with Pale Bird Designs, and welcome to Back to Basics Bootcamp Tumbler Edition, where myself and two other amazing artists will be sharing weekly videos with all the best tips, tricks, and tumbler making secrets. So let's get into today's episode. Today I'm going to be talking about grips, making sure your cup's level on your turner, how to seal your glitter before you put epoxy on it, and then the actual epoxy that you're putting onto your cups. So let's get started. First step is you want to seal your glitter with a triple thick glaze, a clear spray paint, or if I don't feel like going outside, I use a little coat of a polyacrylic just on top of my glitter so it doesn't move. Especially if you have a cup with more than one glitter on it where you don't want those glitters getting into the other areas. Quick coat, let it dry, and then you can move on to your epoxy. But first, let's talk about grips. I use grips from the Tumbler Grip. I've used a couple other brands through the years. I've used the foam footballs when I first started out, and these are my favorite. They keep my cups center. The OG grip I use on almost all of my cups, and I have their XL OG grip for my large format cups, like my wine bottle coolers, my Stanley cups, and things like that. I also have their bullet grip for the smaller handle hold bottles, like the sports bottles or the bullet grips, where this hole's going to be a lot smaller and you need something that's going to fit in there. And these work great for it. So when you're putting your tumbler onto a grip, you just place it down in the center, tighten it a little bit so it doesn't move, and then it gives you a nice sturdy surface to work on. So when you're putting your epoxy on and you're putting a little bit of pressure, it's not going to move. So your cup's going to be straight lengthwise and up and down, so you're not going to get any humps on either side. Now that I've got everything out of the way, let's talk about epoxy. My favorite one to use is Counterculture DIY's Artist Resin and their Fast Set, which I keep in their little squeeze bottles. These squeeze bottles I got off Amazon because I wanted them to have a different color topper. It's icky, I'm sorry. So I could tell them apart. A Fast Set tends to yellow really fast, but once it's on your cup, in those thin layers, you're not really going to see it, but I do not use Fast Set on any of my white tumblers. So if a tumbler has a lot of white on it, like this one does, I do not use Fast Set on them because you will see that yellowing a lot quicker than you will on any of the colored tumblers. For those ones, I only use the Artist Resin. I use the regular. Sometimes in the winter, if it gets pretty cold, I do use the medium what's it called? The medium velocity Artist Resin, but normally I like my epoxy being a little bit thicker. It's what I'm comfortable working with, and it's what works for me. If you have a different brand that works for you, as long as you're doing those mixes, your 1-to-1 ratios correctly, you're going to be golden. So for my epoxy, I use little medicine cups and popsicle sticks. I flip my side A down because it's a little bit thicker. It takes a little bit more time to get to the bottom. While I fill my B, I measure by milliliters, and I usually do 20 milliliters for each coat that I'm doing. I may not use it all, and I'm gonna film these out of frame because I have to eyeball it with those lines. I usually do about 20 milliliters for each of my cups. I may not use all of it, but it gives me enough to work with, and then I just throw my extra into one of the molds. Once I've got my A and B into my medicine cup, you're just gonna mix it. I probably mix way too fast. I get lots of bubbles, but once it's on my cup and I torch it, I don't have any issues with bubbles in my epoxy or anything like that. So you're just gonna wanna mix. You see how as you start to mix the epoxy, it gets a little bit foggy? You're going to want to mix until the epoxy is clear again. And it usually takes about 2 minutes, so I will probably time lapse through this a little bit. So we're just going to hang out and mix for a second. And while you're mixing, make sure you're scraping all of those edges in the bottom to make sure you're getting all of it well incorporated with itself. And you can see now that I've been mixing it for a couple of minutes, the epoxy is much clearer aside from all the bubbles I have, but those don't cause an issue once it's actually on the cup, which I'll show you in a second. So I'll give it a couple more mixes just till I feel like it's super well incorporated, and we'll call it good. So once your epoxy is fully mixed, you're going to want to have your PPE, and which I normally do this earlier on, but since I'm filming, it's a little easier to see without everything. And you'll turn on your turner. And this cup has been sealed with a couple coats of spray paint, just to make sure none of my glitter moves when I start this epoxy. And then I just start at the bottom with one finger and dump it slowly and just kind of let it work itself onto the cup. Not a lot of pressure. Sometimes I move back and forth a little bit, whatever feels comfortable for you, just so you're getting a nice smooth layer. And I do that probably 3 times as I'm going up the cups, just however many lengths of finger that the cup measures. And I have pretty small hands, so it usually takes about 3. And I do about 1/4 of the cup each time, so I have leftovers to go back over if I've missed a spot. And then once I've gone over everything, I do up and down to make sure that bottom rim is getting a nice coat and it's not separating. And then I also go up to the top to make sure that top rim is getting covered all the way to the top. And then once I'm done with that, I dip my finger in and go along the bottom of the cup. Smooth it out once more, just around that bottom rim because it tends to pool when you do that little wiggle. I take off my gloves so I don't get it everywhere. And then I have a torch that I got from Home Depot just to hit the epoxy, pop all those extra bubbles. You want to keep it moving back and forth really quickly up and down the cup. You don't want it to sit too long in one spot or you'll burn your epoxy. And I just go over it a couple of times till all those bubbles are popped, and that's it. Well, friends, that's all I've got for this week. Thanks for joining me for episode 3 of Back to Basics Bootcamp Tumbler Edition. I will link a bunch of the products that I showed you below in my description. I will also link Katy and Kimberly's YouTube channels so you can follow along with their videos as well. And we hope to see you next week. See you later.